He slid the papers across the table like they were nothing. Like 3 years of marriage meant nothing. Like she meant nothing. Kwon Tae-seok didn't look at his wife when he did it. He looked at the window, at the storm outside, at anywhere that wasn't her face. Signed them, he said. Then leave. And Naomi Carter Kwon, a woman who had crossed an ocean, left everything she knew in Chicago, and loved a man the whole world feared, looked at those papers for a long moment. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She picked up the pen, signed her name, pulled off her wedding ring, and set it quietly beside his untouched glass of whiskey. Then she walked out the door. What Tae-seok didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that she was already carrying his child. And in 3 days, he would find out exactly what he had thrown away. If this story already has your heart pounding, stay with us. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story like this one. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling us what city or country you're watching from. We genuinely want to know how far this story has traveled. Now, let's begin. The storm had been building over Busan Harbor for most of the evening, the kind that rolled in off the Yellow Sea without warning and made the whole city feel like it was holding its breath. Rain hammered the tall windows of the Kwon mansion. Thunder moved through the walls like something alive. Inside, the dining room was lit the way Tae-seok preferred, everything controlled, deliberate, no wasted light. The long mahogany table could seat 20. Tonight, only 2 chairs were occupied, and the distance between them felt like a mile. Naomi had come down to dinner, because she always came down to dinner. That was one of the quiet rules of this life she had married into. You showed up, you sat straight, you didn't ask questions in front of staff. She had learned all the rules. She'd learned them the slow, painful way that most people learn things in marriages that weren't quite what they expected. She noticed the papers before she sat down. They were in a cream-colored folder, sitting precisely at her place setting, the way a menu might be placed at a restaurant. Neat, deliberate, already decided. She didn't touch them right away. She sat down, poured herself water from the crystal pitcher, and looked at her husband across that impossible table. Tae-seok was already watching her. That was how she knew this wasn't a mistake. He had that expression, the one she used to think was strength, and had slowly learned was something closer to shutdown. His face was a door that had been locked from the inside. Eyes flat, jaw set. Whatever he was feeling, he had already buried it somewhere she wasn't allowed to go. "What is this?" she asked, even though part of her already knew. "Open it." She opened it. The word divorce has a way of looking different when it's your name at the top of the page. Naomi had seen her share of legal documents over the years. She'd worked corporate compliance in Chicago before following this man to South Korea. Before letting love talk her into a life, she'd had to rebuild from scratch in a city where she didn't speak the language and where people stared at her in grocery stores. She knew what formal paperwork looked like. She knew how to read it without flinching. She read every line. Then she set the folder back on the table, very carefully, and looked at her husband. "You want to divorce." It wasn't a question. Tae-seok said nothing for 3 full seconds. Then, Jong Song-ho has offered an alliance. She waited. His condition is the marriage. His daughter, Min Seo. Naomi absorbed this, the way you absorb a car crash, not all at once, but in pieces, each one arriving slightly after the last. "You're telling me," she said slowly, "that another crime boss wants you to marry his daughter. And you're what, considering it?" "I've already agreed." The rain outside got louder, or maybe it just seemed that way. "You agreed." Her voice was still even. That was the thing about Naomi, that Tae-seok had never fully understood. She didn't break easily. She bent sometimes, under the weight of this life. But breaking was a different thing entirely. When? 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks, she turned that number over in her mind. 2 weeks of sitting across from him at this table, sleeping in the same bed, watching him drink his morning coffee, and he had already signed away their marriage. He'd been carrying it around like a business decision he hadn't gotten around to filing yet. 2 weeks, she said. Not loud, just the word, placed on the table between them like a stone. "Naomi, don't." She held up one hand. "I need a minute." He gave her the minute. That was something, she supposed. He could have just pushed the folder closer and told her to hurry up. He didn't. He sat there and let her have 60 seconds of silence, which might have been the most honest thing he'd done all week. She used the minute to breathe, to remind herself who she was, to locate, somewhere in her chest, the part of herself that existed before she ever met Kwon Tae-seok. She'd found that part of herself in a bar in Itaewon, actually not Tae-seok, but herself. She'd been in Seoul for a conference, 2 years before they met, and she'd gotten lost coming back from a dinner and ended up in this tiny underground place that played old American soul music and served drinks that tasted nothing like what they were named. She'd sat at the bar alone and thought, I could live here. I could actually live somewhere like this, not because it was glamorous, because it felt real, loud and chaotic and real, in a way that her life in Chicago, organized, predictable, quietly suffocating, had stopped feeling years before. She had held on to that version of herself through everything. The move, the culture shock, learning Korean badly and then less badly, learning the unspoken rules of Tae-seok's world, the loneliness of being the only black woman in every single room, always the stares, the questions, the assumptions. She had held on to that woman who sat alone in an underground bar and felt free for 20 minutes. She was holding on to her now. I'm not going to beg you, Naomi said finally. I'm not asking you to, and I'm not going to make a scene. I know. She looked at the pen on the table. A nice pen, of course it was. Everything in this house was nice. Everything was chosen with care and displayed with intention, including, apparently, the pen provided for signing away a marriage. She picked it up. She signed her name on every line that required it. Her handwriting was the same as it always was, clear, slightly left-leaning, unhurried. The signature of a woman who was not, in this moment, falling apart. Then she closed the folder. Then she pulled off her wedding ring. It was a simple gold band she'd chosen it herself, had actually argued for something plain when Tae-seok had initially wanted to give her something with diamonds the size of thumbnails. She'd said, I don't need the world to see how much you spent. I just need to know you mean it. He had loved that about her. He'd told her so once, when he was tired and had his guard down, and was more honest than usual. She set the ring beside his whiskey glass. She stood up. One day, she said, pulling her chair in neatly, an absurd domestic gesture under the circumstances, you're going to understand what you just did. Tae-seok looked at the ring. He didn't look at her. Naomi, but she was already walking away, and she did not walk quickly, because she refused to let him think she was fleeing. She walked the way she always walked in this house, like she belonged there, like she had every right to every inch of it, like no one in the world could make her small. She made it to the hallway before her legs started shaking. She made it to the staircase before her eyes burned. She made it to the bedroom they had shared past tense already, and she shut the door behind her and stood in the dark for a moment with her back against the wood and her hand flat on her stomach. 8 weeks. She was 8 weeks pregnant. She had taken the test 4 days ago in the private bathroom attached to her home office, had sat on the edge of the tub and stared at the result for a long time, had been trying to figure out how to tell him. Now she stood in the dark and thought, with a clarity that surprised her, he will use this. If he knows, he will use it. Not out of cruelty necessarily. Tae-seok didn't operate from cruelty. He operated from calculation. If he knew there was a child, his child, he would make decisions about that child without consulting her. He would construct a plan. He would manage the situation. He would, in some terrible and probably well-intentioned way, turn their child into a psos on the same board where he'd just finished moving her. She was not going to let that happen. She pulled out her phone and called Camille. Camille Brooks had been Naomi's best friend since they were 19 and studying in the same dormitory at Northwestern. Camille was loud where Naomi was quiet, reckless where Naomi was careful, and had hated Tae-seok on principle from the first time Naomi described the relationship. Not because he was in the Mafia. Camille was from the south side of Chicago and was not easily impressed by dangerous men. Because Camille had said, any man who makes you feel like you have to earn the right to be loved is already costing you too much. Naomi had not listened. She had been in love. The phone rang twice. Naomi, it's almost midnight. What? I need you, Naomi said. Her voice cracked on the second word, just slightly, just enough to tell Camille everything. There was a pause on the other end. Then, very quietly, where are you? Still in the house. But I'm leaving tonight. How much time do you need to pack? An hour, maybe less. I'll be outside in 40 minutes. That was Camille. No questions. No dramatics. No, I told you so, not yet. Anyway, just I'll be there. Naomi breathed out slowly. There's something else, she said. Okay, I'm pregnant. The silence on the other end lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then, oh, sweetheart, don't. If you're soft with me right now, I'm going to fall apart, and I can't do that yet. Another pause. Then Camille shifted gears with the ease of a woman who had known Naomi for 14 years. Okay, 40 minutes. Bring warm clothes, your passport, your laptop, and whatever documents you have in your name. Leave everything else. Everything? Everything. You can get more stuff. You can't get another you. Naomi looked around the bedroom. 3 years of a life, arranged in someone else's space, carefully negotiated room by room. The lamp she'd brought from her apartment in Chicago. The framed print from a street market in Insadong that she'd bought herself on a day she was feeling lonely and needed something of her own. The reading chair by the window where she'd spent 100 quiet mornings with coffee while Tae-seok was already downstairs on calls. She packed what mattered. She was out the door in 38 minutes. She did not say goodbye. She didn't leave a note. She left the wedding ring. That would be enough. 4 days later, Tae-seok was in his study when Jin-woo knocked and entered without waiting, which meant it was something he needed to see immediately. His lieutenant set an envelope on the desk without a word. Tae-seok looked at it. Cream-colored, no return address. His name in handwriting, he recognized even before his brain fully caught up with the recognition. He opened it. Inside was a tiny pink bracelet, the kind hospitals put on newborns. The kind that had a name and a date on a small white tag. He turned it over. The tag said, Baby Girl Kwon, and beneath it, folded once, was a single piece of paper. Handwritten. 8 words. One day our daughter will ask why her father chose someone else. Tae-seok sat very still. Jin-woo stood across the desk and said nothing, which was what Jin-woo did when he understood that words would make things worse. The storm from 4 nights ago had left the harbor dark and glassy. Outside the study window, so Busan sat in the kind of early morning quiet that felt borrowed, the city holding itself together just before the day started pulling at its seams. Tae-seok read the note again. He read it a 3rd time. His hand, he noticed distantly, was not entirely steady. He had divorced his wife because he believed it was the right decision. The pragmatic decision, the decision a man in his position had to make, the kind of cold math that kept an empire standing when everything around it was trying to bring it down. Songho's alliance would close vulnerabilities that Tae-seok had been managing for 2 years. The marriage to Min-seo was transactional. He would have been honest with Min-seo about that. He would have been, in his way, fair. He had told himself all of this. He had told himself that Naomi was smart and strong and would land on her feet because she always had, because she was the kind of woman who found her footing no matter where you dropped her. He had told himself she would be fine. He had not told himself about the child, because he hadn't known. He folded the note. He set the bracelet in his palm and looked at it. Pink, impossibly small. The weight of it was nothing. It was a thin plastic thing, a hospital-issued piece of nothing, but it sat in his hand like something much heavier. I need to find her, he said. Yes, Jin-woo said. Today. Jin-woo's expression shifted not dramatically, because Jin-woo didn't do dramatic, but enough. With respect, he said carefully, if she didn't want to be found, she planned for that. Tae-seok knew he was right. Naomi had lived inside his world for 3 years. She had been quiet about how much she was paying attention, but she had been paying attention to everything. She knew how his security worked. She knew how his people searched. She would have accounted for all of it. Then we'll need to be smarter than she expects, Tae-seok said. He placed the bracelet on his desk. He looked at it for another moment. Then he stood up and walked to the window and looked out at the harbor and felt something he hadn't felt in years. not rage, not cold calculation, not the efficient machine state he operated from when he was making decisions that cost people their livelihoods or their freedom, or occasionally something worse. He felt afraid, not for himself. For once in his adult life, Kwon Tae-seok felt afraid for someone else. Two people, actually, one of whom was small enough to fit a bracelet the size of his thumb. He pressed his forehead briefly to the cold glass of the window. Just for a second. Just long enough to feel something real. Start with Chicago, he said. Her friend, Camille Brooks. She won't be there, but Camille will have helped her. Whatever trail there is starts there. And if there's no trail, Tae-seok pushed off from the window. There's always a trail. We just have to be willing to look long enough. He walked back to his desk and sat down and opened his laptop. And the feared boss of one of Busan's most powerful criminal organizations spent the next 3 hours staring at an 8-word note and trying to figure out how a man earns back something he threw away with both hands. He wasn't sure yet that it was possible. He started looking anyway. 200 kilometers away, in a small apartment in a city that didn't know her name, Naomi Carter Kwon sat in a second-hand rocking chair she'd bought from a neighbor for 20,000 won and nursed a lie she was telling herself. This is fine. This is manageable. You've handled harder things. She hadn't handled harder things. But the alternative to believing that was falling apart, and she had an 8-week-old pregnancy to protect, and a best friend asleep on her pull-out couch, and a plan that was mostly held together by stubbornness and necessity. The apartment was small, the kind of small that would have felt suffocating in another life. 1 bedroom, a kitchen that was mostly a counter with ambitions, a bathroom where the shower pressure was either scalding or useless, and nothing in between. The windows faced a parking structure. There was a laundromat below that ran machines until 11 at night. It was nothing like the mansion. Naomi sat in the rocking chair and put one hand on her stomach and breathed. She had done the right thing, she believed that. Tae-seok would have found out about the pregnancy, and he would have not taken the child, not exactly. Not cruelly, but he would have made decisions. He would have decided where it was safe and where it wasn't. He would have decided how she lived, and who she talked to, and what her days looked like. He would have wrapped his protection around her, the way he wrapped everything he cared about so tightly. You couldn't tell, sometimes, whether you were being held or being contained. She'd been contained for 3 years. She was done with that. She put her other hand over the first one and felt the barely there curve of her stomach and thought about her daughter. She decided it was a girl. For no particular reason, except that she needed to call this person something, and said, very quietly into the empty kitchen, "I've got you. We're going to figure this out." Outside, the laundromat hummed. A machine finished its cycle. Naomi rocked forward and back and didn't sleep and made promises she wasn't sure she could keep, the way mothers have always done, from the very beginning of the world. She kept them anyway. 3 months passed, and Tae-seok didn't sleep more than 4 hours on any given night. That wasn't unusual for him. He'd been running on broken sleep since he was 26, since the year he took over from his father and discovered that power wasn't something you held, it was something that held you. And it squeezed at 3 in the morning when the house was quiet and there was nothing to distract you from the weight of every decision you'd ever made. He knew how to function on 4 hours. He'd built a criminal empire on 4 hours. But this was different. Before, the sleeplessness had been about logistics, about threats and counterplays and the 1,000 moving pieces of an organization that never fully stopped moving. He'd lie awake running calculations, contingencies. It was work, essentially, just work without a desk. Now he lay awake, staring at a pink plastic bracelet he kept in the drawer of his nightstand. He'd stopped telling himself it was about the alliance. He'd canceled the arranged marriage to Min-seo 8 days after Naomi left. 8 days of telling himself he was being practical, that the note was emotional manipulation, that Naomi had made her choice the moment she walked out without saying a word. 8 days of that particular brand of self-deception, and then he'd called Seong-ho and told him the deal was off. And Seong-ho had gone quiet on the phone in a way that made the back of Tae-seok's neck prickle. Not angry. Quiet. The way a man goes quiet when he's already moved to the next piece on the board. Tae-seok had filed that away. He had enough to worry about. His people had been looking for Naomi for 3 months. Jinwoo ran the search personally, which meant it was being done correctly and carefully and without the kind of noise that would embarrass the organization or, worse, frighten her further underground. They'd tracked her credit cards, nothing. She'd gone cash within 48 hours of leaving. They'd monitored her phone dead on arrival, SIM destroyed. They'd watched her mother's address in Chicago, her sister's apartment in Atlanta, 2 former colleagues she'd been close to in Seoul. Nothing. Camille Brooks had been particularly difficult. Camille had apparently anticipated being watched. Her own phone had been replaced. Her movements were irregular, and she had the specific skill set of a woman who had grown up on the south side of Chicago and did not panic easily. When one of Tae-seok's men had approached her outside her workplace carefully, professionally, just to ask whether she knew how to reach Naomi, Camille had looked the man in the eye and said, "Tell your boss I said go to hell," and then walked into her building without a backward glance. Tae-seok had actually almost respected that. Almost. He was in the middle of his 4th hour of reviewing shipping manifests, a legitimate business function that he was using to keep his hands busy when Jinwoo knocked and entered and set a tablet on the desk in front of him. "We found something," Jinwoo said. Tae-seok looked at the tablet. It was a photograph, slightly grainy, taken from distance. A street. A woman in a dark coat, face partially turned away, carrying a paper grocery bag in one arm and something else in the other arm, something bundled, wrapped in the kind of thick fabric you used in winter. His chest did something complicated. "When?" he said. "Yesterday morning. Incheon. She's been there for at least 2 months. We found a lease agreement in a neighboring unit that lists her as an emergency contact. Fake name, but the physical description matches. And there's a secondary name listed as occupant." Jinwoo paused. "The occupant name is Arielle." Tae-seok looked at the photograph for a long time. "Is she safe?" "As far as we can determine. The building is ordinary. The neighborhood is quiet." Jinwoo hesitated, which was unusual, because Jinwoo was not a man who hesitated. "There's something else, say it." "The SUV." Tae-seok looked up from the tablet. "In the past 6 days," Jinwoo said, and his voice had taken on the flat, careful tone he used when he was delivering information he found genuinely alarming. "A black SUV has been logged parked across from that building on 4 separate mornings. Different plates each time. The driver doesn't exit the vehicle." The room got very still. "It's not one of ours," Tae-seok said. "It wasn't a question, no. Tell me whose it is." "We're working on it. The plates are rotated through a shell company that takes 3 layers to trace. It's not street level." Jinwoo looked at him directly. "Whoever it is has resources." Tae-seok pushed back from his desk and stood up in one motion. Not dramatically, just with the specific economy of a man who has made a decision and is already moving toward the next one. "Get me a car, not a convoy, 1 car. You're going yourself." "Obviously, I'm going myself. She may not want, I know what she wants." He was already moving toward the door. "I also know someone else knows where she is, and that's finished as of right now." Jinwoo said nothing more. He was already on his phone. Naomi heard the knock at 9:47 in the morning. She knew the time, precisely because Arielle had finally, after 40 minutes of fighting it, fallen asleep on the small playmat in the living room. And Naomi had been watching the clock with the intense focus of a woman rationing every minute of silence. She had a list of things she needed to do in whatever window she got. Emails, a phone call to the bank, laundry that had been sitting in the machine for 6 hours because she kept forgetting to switch it. The knock was not Camille. Camille used a specific rhythm, 3 quick, 1 slow that they'd established in the first week. A code that had felt slightly ridiculous until the second time a stranger came to the door, and Naomi had been very grateful to know it wasn't her friend. This knock was even, measured. The knock of someone who was trying very hard not to sound like what he was. Naomi knew it immediately. She stood in the middle of her living room and looked at the door and felt the particular mixture of terror and something else, some she didn't have a clean name for, that came with recognizing the presence of the man who had broken. Something essential in her and who she had loved anyway. Who she still loved, possibly, in the way that you still feel a fracture long after the bone has knit back together. The feeling isn't warmth. It's just the knowledge that something was broken there. Arielle slept on the mat. Naomi looked at her daughter. Dark curls, tiny fists, 4 months old and already looking, in the soft way of babies, like the best parts of both of them Naomi's nose, and something around the eyes that was Tae-seok's, though Naomi was not ready to say that out loud to anyone. She walked to the door. She opened it. Tae-seok stood in the hallway looking like 3 months of bad sleep and worse choices. He was wearing a plain dark jacket, no tie, no visible security, which meant there was security somewhere nearby, but he'd made them disappear, which she supposed was a kind of effort. His hair was slightly longer than she remembered. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, or that she hadn't noticed before, or that she'd noticed and stopped seeing the way you stop seeing the furniture in a room you've lived in too long. He looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything for a moment that lasted approximately 1 geological era. "You can't be here," she said. "I know. Then why are you?" He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. "There's a black SUV. It's been outside your building. 4 mornings in the last week." She stared at him. "It's not mine," he said. "I need you to understand that. We just found out it was there. We don't know yet whose it is." "We," she repeated, and something in her voice sharpened. "So you've been looking for me?" "Yes." "For how long?" He didn't look away. Whatever else she had ever thought about Tae-seok, he had never been a coward about being caught. "From the day after you left. 3 months." "Yes." Naomi looked past him at the empty hallway, then back at his face. She was doing the math. She was always doing the math in this life. Calculation between what was dangerous and what was survivable, and how much of either she could afford. Someone else knew where she was. That someone was not Tae-seok. Which meant there was a variable she hadn't accounted for. Which meant her plan had a hole in it she hadn't found yet. She hated this. She hated that she needed him, even just for this. She hated that she'd built her entire escape around making sure she didn't need him, and here she was, 6 seconds into seeing his face, already reassessing. "Come in," she said. "You have 10 minutes." He came inside. He stopped when he saw Arielle. Naomi watched it happen, watched the exact moment the man who commanded hundreds of people and never visibly lost his composure ran completely out of whatever armor he wore. He stood in the middle of her small, second-hand furnished living room and looked at his daughter sleeping on a floor mat and went absolutely, completely still. Arielle had her fist pressed against her cheek. She was making a small sound in her sleep, the soft rhythmic sound babies make that sounds like the memory of something. Tae-seok didn't move. Naomi folded her arms. She was not going to make this easy for him. She was not going to cry. She was not going to reach for the old warmth that her body still remembered, even when her brain was trying to run away from it. She stood in her living room with her arms crossed and her jaw set and watched the man who had handed her divorce papers with his eyes on the window absolutely fall apart in front of a sleeping baby. "She's 4 months," Naomi said. He didn't look up. "She's beautiful. Her name is Arielle." Something shifted in his face, something unreadable, but not cold. Never cold when it came to this. He stopped. "Can I sit near her?" The question cost him something. She could tell. Kwon Tae-seok did not ask permission for things as a rule. He arranged circumstances until the answer was yes without having to ask. The fact that he was asking told her more than 3 months of silence had. Sit on the floor," she said. "She doesn't like loud movement when she's just gone down." He sat on the floor, not in the chair across from it, not on the couch at a safe distance. He lowered himself to the floor of her cheaply furnished Incheon apartment and sat cross-legged 2 feet from his sleeping daughter, and he looked at her the way people look at things that have rearranged their internal architecture. Naomi sat in the rocking chair and gave him 30 seconds of that before she said, "Tell me about the SUV." He pulled himself back to the surface. The transition was visible, like watching a man surface from water, the blink, the refocus, the return to operational mode. Rotated plates, shell company. Whoever it is has money and doesn't want to be identified quickly. How long before your people identify them? Jinwoo is working on it. Hours, maybe a day. And until then? Until then, you shouldn't stay here. He looked around the apartment not with judgment, or she didn't think it was judgment. It looked more like he was cataloging exits and sight lines, which was how his brain processed spaces. I have a safe house in Suwon. Clean. Not connected to the organization in any way that can be traced. You and Arielle would be— Stop. He stopped. I'm not going to one of your safe houses, Naomi said. I'm not going somewhere that you control and I don't, and I'm not going to put myself and my daughter in a situation where your idea of protection and my idea of protection turn out to be different things again. This isn't like before. You're right, it isn't, because before I was your wife, and you still made every decision without talking to me. Now I'm your ex-wife, so I'm genuinely not sure what makes you think this conversation goes differently. The word ex-wife landed in the room with a specific kind of weight. She saw him take it. He didn't argue with it. What do you want me to do? He said. The question surprised her. She wasn't sure she'd ever heard him ask it and mean it, ask it as an actual question, rather than as a rhetorical structure before he told her what he'd already decided. She uncrossed her arms, then crossed them again. Tell me who the SUV belongs to. When I know, you'll know. That's not good enough. Naomi, that is not good enough. Her voice stayed level, but he had known her long enough to hear what was underneath it. Not panic. Fury. The specific fury of a woman who has been managed for too long and is done with it. I am sitting in this apartment with our daughter. And? You're telling me someone has been watching us for a week? Your answer is, I'll tell you when I know. Do you hear yourself? Arielle stirred. They both went still. The baby made a small sound, shifted her fist against her cheek, and settled back into sleep. Naomi exhaled slowly, quietly. I'll tell you the moment I know, Tae-seok said. His voice was different, lower, stripped of the automatic authority. Not when I figured out what to do about it. The moment I know. She studied him, the lines around his eyes, the slight disarray of his hair, the way he was sitting on her floor like a man who had walked out of a war and wasn't entirely sure what peacetime required of him. You look terrible, she said. I know. When did you last sleep? He thought about it genuinely, which told her the answer was bad. I'm not sure. Tae-seok. I've been looking for you for 3 months. That's not— She stopped. Started again. That's not a justification. I wasn't justifying, I was answering. Arielle woke up. Not crying, just awake, the way babies go from asleep to present without the gradual transition adults get. One moment she was still, and the next her eyes were open, and she was looking at the ceiling with the particular focused intensity of a 4-month-old encountering consciousness again after a break. Then she turned her head, and she looked directly at Tae-seok. He froze. Naomi watched her daughter regard this stranger on the floor with the calm, serious appraisal of someone who hadn't yet learned to pretend. Arielle's gaze was unhurried. She wasn't alarmed. She was just looking, processing this new face in her limited field of recurring faces. Then Arielle made a sound. Not a word, not even close. Just a sound, the kind that meant nothing and everything. Like a greeting in a language that predated language. Tae-seok made a sound back. It was involuntary, Naomi could see that. He hadn't planned it. It was just a reflex. The sound you make when something small and unknowing communicates with you and your body answers before your brain can catch up. He made the sound and then looked slightly alarmed that he'd made it, and Arielle responded by waving one hand in the direction of his face with the conviction of someone issuing a verdict. Naomi pressed her lips together very hard. She was not going to find this touching. She was not going to let the image of her daughter and the man who discarded her having a conversation in baby sounds soften any of the ground she'd spent 3 months building under herself. She was not. Don't pick her up, she said. I wasn't going to. You were going to. Don't. He sat back slightly. Okay. It was another hour before Jin Woo called. Tae-seok took the call in the hallway because Naomi had told him to take it in the hallway, and she sat in the rocking chair with Arielle in her arms and tried to read the cadence of his voice through the closed door, even though she couldn't make out words. Jinwoo's voice was higher, faster. Tae-seok's responses were short. 1 word, 2 words. The kind of dialogue that meant information was being received and processed, and whatever was being received was not nothing. He came back into the apartment. His face had changed. not dramatically.
Mm-mm.
But Naomi had spent 3 years learning the very specific geography of this man's expressions, the small plates that shifted under the surface when something genuinely alarmed him, rather than just inconvenienced him. She saw it now. Tell me, she said. He sat down on the couch. Not on the floor. He needed to sit on something with a back, apparently. Jang Seong-ho, he said. Naomi held Arielle slightly closer without thinking about it. You're the man you made the deal with. Yes, he's been watching me. He's been watching both of you. Tae-seok put his hands on his knees. Since before I canceled the alliance, he started tracking you, the shell company that controls the property search, the surveillance setup. It was initiated while we were still married. Before the divorce papers, the apartment was very quiet. He knew, Naomi said. He planned for it. If I accepted the alliance, he had leverage over me with you. If I refused, Tae-seok stopped, his jaw worked. If I refused, he had a bargaining chip. Me and Arielle. Yes. Naomi looked at her daughter. Arielle had her hand wrapped around Naomi's finger with the grip, strength that always surprised her, that fierce instinctive claim that babies have on whatever they reach for. As if they know that holding on is the first and most important thing. The divorce, Naomi said slowly. The alliance offer. He made it when he did, because he'd already identified that I was the... Yes. He used you against yourself. Yes. The word came out flat and hard, and she could hear in it everything he wasn't saying. The humiliation of it. The specific agony of a man who prided himself on seeing every move on the board, discovering that he'd been playing on a board someone else had designed. How long has there been someone inside your organization feeding him information? She asked. He looked at her. How did you? Because the alternative is that he's a psychic, and I don't believe in psychics. He knew too much, too fast. The building I chose, the fake name, someone helped him narrow it down. Someone who knew enough about how your people search to tell him what they were finding. Tae-seok was quiet for a moment. Jinwoo has a name. Who? Choi Hyun-jae. He's been in the organization for 4 years. Mid-level logistics, which means he has access to the search parameters, but not to the inner circle. His voice was controlled, but his knuckles, Naomi noticed, were white against his knees. He's been passing information for at least 8 months. 8 months. She did the math. That's before we separated. Yes. So Song-ho has been building this for at least 8 months. Probably longer. Hyun-jae may have been placed deliberately. We don't know yet how far back the initial contact goes. Arielle made a soft sound and Naomi adjusted her hold automatically, rocking slightly without meaning to, the way her body had learned to do in 4 months of motherhood, the constant low-level calibration that never fully switched off. What does he want? She asked. The endgame. What does Song-ho actually want? Tae-seok looked at her for a moment, and she could see him deciding something, deciding whether to give her the actual answer or a managed version of it. She held his gaze and did not look away, and whatever he saw in her face resolved the decision. Control of my ports, he said, my shipping routes. 2 of my logistics companies have government contracts that he can't acquire through legitimate channels. He wants access, and he wants it guaranteed. And the marriage to his daughter was a binding, legal, social, organizational. Once Min-seo and I were married, Song-ho would have had standing in every decision I made. He would have moved people in gradually. Within 2 years, he would have effectively absorbed my operation from the inside. Tae-seok paused. He's done it before. To the Park family in Daegu. Took him 3 years. Naomi rocked forward and back. Once, twice. And when you canceled the alliance, he moved to Plan B. Tae-seok's voice was very quiet now. He's going to force the marriage. Not through an offer. Through pressure. What kind of pressure? The kind where I don't have a choice. He looked at Arielle. Where we don't have a choice. The room felt different. Not smaller. Exactly. But tighter. The air had a specific density that Naomi's associated with the moments in her life when something irrevocable was either about to happen or had already happened, and she was just now understanding it. She had been running from one threat. She had been living inside another one the entire time. The apartment, the building. She'd chosen it because it was cheap and anonymous, and nowhere near anyone who knew her name. She'd chosen it because it felt invisible. She looked at Tae-seok. The building, she said. Something crossed his face. Tell me about the building. Tae-seok, he was quiet for 3 full seconds. The lease, he said. The management company. Jin-woo traced it when he traced the SUV. 3 layers of shell companies. And the building is Seong-ho's. Naomi stopped rocking. She looked at the walls of the apartment she had chosen because it felt safe. The window she had taped extra weather, stripping around because there was a draft. The corner where she'd wedged Arielle's second-hand crib because the light was softer there. Song-ho's building. She had been living in Song-ho's building. She had run from one man's orbit and landed, without knowing it, directly inside his enemies. Her throat was tight. She wasn't going to let it go further than that. He let me believe I'd escaped. He needed you here. Contained. Where he knew where you were. How long has he known? Probably from the beginning. Tae-seok's voice had a roughness in it that wasn't there before. Something that might, in a different man, have been guilt. He may have been the one who made it easy for you to find this place. Favorable listing. Good timing. Things that seemed like luck. Naomi thought about the day she'd found the apartment listing. 3 weeks into her disappearance, running out of places to stay, Camille exhausted and stretched thin, and the two of them scrolling through rental sites on a burner phone in a motel in Suwon. The listing had been almost too good. She'd told herself it was luck. She was not a woman who believed in luck. She had believed it anyway, because she'd needed to. Arielle grabbed her finger again. Hard. That fierce, instinctive grip. Naomi looked down at her daughter. Then she looked up at her husband. We need to move, she said, tonight. Yes. And I need to know everything. Not the version you think I can handle. Everything. Song-ho's structure, his people, what he's actually planning and when. I need every piece of information you have. Tae-seok looked at her. Whatever calculation he was running, it was brief. Okay. Not because I'm asking you to protect me, she said. Because I'm going to help you end this. He was quiet. I'm serious, she said. I'm not cargo, Tae-seok. I'm not a liability you move from one safe house to another while the men handle things. I was a compliance officer. I understand financial structures. I understand documentation. And I've been sitting in this apartment for 3 months with nothing to do but think about exactly how a man like Song-ho keeps his hands clean while other people do his dirty work. She shifted Arielle to her other arm. I know things you don't, and we're going to need all of it. Outside, somewhere on the street below, an engine started. They both heard it. Tae-seok was at the window in 3 steps, not fast enough to be visible from outside, angling to see without being seen. His face, when he turned back, was controlled in the specific way that meant the opposite of calm. The SUV is back, he said, and somewhere between this morning and now, something had shifted in its positioning. It was no longer across the street. It was parked directly below. Tae-seok moved away from the window without making a sound. That was the thing about him, that Naomi had never fully gotten used to the way his body shifted registers in an instant, from whatever approximation of normal he was performing, to something older and more essential, something that operated below the level of thought. One moment, he was a man sitting on her floor, looking at his daughter. The next, he was something else entirely. Edges where there had been softness. Economy where there had been hesitation. He crossed to her in 4 steps and kept his voice at almost nothing. Is there a back way out of this unit? Maintenance corridor. End of the hall, door needs a key, but I have one the super gave all the residents a copy after someone got trapped during a fire drill last winter. Where does it come out? Parking level B, there's a service exit that opens onto the alley behind the building. He was already pulling out his phone, texting Jin Wano, his thumb moving with the focused speed of a man who had sent messages like this before, the kind that meant we are leaving now. Be ready. She watched him and held Arielle against her chest and did her own calculation, the one she'd been running since the moment he told her about the building. Song-ho's building. She'd been here for 2 months. Paid rent to a management company. Signed documents in a fake name that was apparently no obstacle whatsoever to a man who'd been positioning pieces around her before she'd even known she was on his board. She had been so careful. She had thought through every obvious move Tae-seok's people would make and built her disappearance around avoiding them. And she had walked directly into a trap that had nothing to do with Tae-seok at all. That was the part she couldn't quite settle. Not the fear. Fear was manageable. Fear was just information. What she couldn't settle was the particular humiliation of having been outsmarted by a man whose existence she'd known about for less than 2 hours. "Bag," Tae-seok said. "What you need?" 2 minutes. "I've been packed for a month." He looked at her. "I told you," she said. "I've been watching that SUV too." Something moved across his face that was not quite pride and not quite grief. She didn't have time to name it. She was already in the bedroom, pulling the go bag from under the bed she'd assembled it 3 weeks ago. After the second time she saw the SUV, a habit she'd picked up from reading enough about how people in Tae-seok's world disappeared when they needed to. Essentials, documents, 2 changes of clothes for her, a week of supplies for Arielle, cash in 3 different currencies, a prepaid phone she hadn't activated yet. She came back into the living room with the bag over one shoulder and Arielle in the carrier against her chest, already buckled in with the practiced efficiency of 4 months of one-handed everything. Tae-seok looked at the carrier, at the way Arielle settled against Naomi's chest with the specific trust of a creature who had never once questioned whether she would be held. He looked at it for exactly 1 second. Then he moved to the door. "Stay behind me," he said. "If I stop, you stop. If I say floor, you go down. No questions." "And Arielle? The carrier keeps her against you." "That's the safest position." He opened the door a crack and looked into the hallway. Clear. They moved. The hallway was ordinary fluorescent lighting, thin carpet, the smells of someone's dinner from 2 units down. Ordinary enough that the wrongness of their movement through it felt almost absurd. A man in a dark jacket moving like controlled water. A woman in a baby carrier with a go bag, matching his pace with the kind of deliberate calm that takes everything you have. Arielle, pressed against her mother's chest, made no sound. As if she understood in the way babies sometimes seem to understand, things they have no business understanding, that quiet was what was needed right now. The maintenance door was where Naomi had said it was. The key worked. The corridor beyond was concrete and industrial and cold, lit by a single strip of harsh white light that made everything look slightly medical. Their footsteps changed against the hard floor. Tae-seok's phone vibrated. He checked it without slowing down. "Jinwoo's at the service exit." "How many 2 cars?" "I said 1 is mine." "1 is yours." He glanced back at her. "You can drive separately. I'm not asking you to go anywhere you don't choose." She absorbed this, kept moving. The parking level opened around them, low ceiling, the smell of exhaust and concrete damp. Jinwoo was standing at the service exit with 2 other men, all of them arranged with the specific stillness of people who are trying to look like they're not waiting while very clearly waiting. Jinwoo looked at Naomi, then at Arielle in the carrier. His expression didn't change, but she had the impression of something shifting behind his eyes, a recalibration of some kind. "Mrs. Kwon," he said. "It's Carter," she said. "Naomi Carter." Jinwoo accepted this without comment, which she appreciated. "The SUV?" Tae-seok asked. "Still parked. Driver hasn't moved." But Jinwoo paused. "We picked up a second vehicle 2 blocks north. It arrived 8 minutes ago. Same operation?" "Almost certainly." Naomi looked at the service exit. The alley beyond it was gray and narrow, and a black car was idling 3 meters from the door. "That's my car?" "Yes. Driver is Han. She's been with me for 6 years. She'll take you wherever you direct her." Naomi noted that. She didn't know if it was a deliberate choice or just circumstance, but it landed differently than it would have if Jinwoo had said he. "I want to know the destination of your vehicle before I go anywhere," she said to Tae-seok. "Suwon, the safe house I mentioned, address." He gave it to her. She typed it into the prepaid phone she'd just activated, stored it, and put the phone in her jacket pocket. "If you deviate from that address, I'll know. I won't deviate." "If you'd Naomi?" He said it quietly. Just her name. The way he used to say it, sometimes in the early part of their marriage, when things were simpler, or maybe just when she understood less. "I know." She looked at him for 2 seconds. Then she walked to the second car, opened the rear door, adjusted the carrier so Arielle was comfortable, and got in. The cars moved out separately. She did not look back. The safe house in Suwon was not what she'd expected. She had expected something that looked like a fortress, reinforced doors, blackout curtains, the architectural grammar of a place designed to keep people in as much as out. She'd seen one of Tae-seok's safe houses once before, early in their marriage, and it had looked exactly like that. A place where comfort was an afterthought and security was every thought. This was different. It looked like a house. An ordinary house, slightly outside the city center, with a small garden that someone had maintained and windows that let in the afternoon light and a kitchen that had actual food in it, not emergency rations. Actual food, like someone had stocked it for people who were going to be here for a while and were going to need to eat actual meals. She stood in the kitchen for a moment after she arrived, before Tae-seok got there, and let herself feel the specific weight of needing to eat and sleep and be human in the middle of something that kept trying to make her into a piece of a plan. Arielle was awake in the carrier and looking around at the new ceiling with the curious attention she brought to every new space. And Naomi unhooked the carrier and set her on the clean floor on a folded blanket from the go bag and watched her daughter examine her new environment with complete equanimity. You're better at this than I am, Naomi thought. Tae-seok arrived 20 minutes later. Jin-woo came with him and then immediately disappeared in another part of the house. And Tae-seok came into the kitchen and stopped in the doorway and looked at Arielle on the blanket for a moment before he looked at Naomi. Sit down, she said. Naomi, you haven't slept. Sit down before you're useless to both of us. He sat down at the kitchen table. She made coffee because the alternative was standing there feeling the enormity of the situation, and making coffee was a thing she could do with her hands. She set a cup in front of him and sat across from him with her own cup and looked at the table between them. Tell me everything about Seong-ho, she said. Not the summary. The details, he told her. It took 40 minutes. He talked about Seong-ho's structure, the legitimate businesses on top, the criminal network beneath, the ports in Incheon and Busan, where goods moved without detailed documentation, the political relationships maintained through a foundation that funded campaigns and received favors in return. He talked about the Park family in Daegu, how the absorption had worked, how Seong-ho had installed his own people, gradually, how the original family had ended up with the title of ownership, but none of the actual power. He talked about Min-seo, Seong-ho's daughter, who was 28 and apparently had an MBA from a European university, and ran 3 of the legitimate companies, and, according to Jin-woo's intelligence, did not know the full scope of what her father was doing. He talked about Yun-jae, how long he'd been in the organization, what access he had, what he would have been able to pass to Seong-ho. He talked about the 8 months of leakage, the slow drip of information that had allowed Seong-ho to map Tae-seok's vulnerabilities, woes, with surgical precision. He talked about the anonymous message that had appeared on his private phone. If you want to see your wife again, you're already too late. He sent that himself, Naomi said. Tae-seok paused. We assumed it was a threat. It wasn't a threat. It was a move. He wanted you to panic. A man who panics moves fast and makes mistakes. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. When did you get that message? About 5 weeks ago. And what did you do? I accelerated the search. Expanded resources. We made 2 mistakes in the following week that we had to walk back because we moved too fast. Exactly. She looked at him. He's been playing you the entire time. He made the original offer, knowing you might refuse. He was watching to see how you'd react when you did. He identified me as the variable, not because you told him, but because he studied you long enough to figure out what you wouldn't trade. Tae-seok was quiet. He's not just smart, she said. He's patient. He's been building this for longer than 8 months. Hyun-jae was probably placed when Seong-ho first started, looking at your organization as a target. That could be 2 years ago. 3. That's Tae-seok stopped. His jaw tightened. That would mean he was watching us while we were married. Yes, she said it flatly, not cruelly. Just the fact. He was watching your marriage, looking for the crack. Tae-seok put both hands flat on the table. He looked at them for a moment. When he looked back up, something in his face had changed a resolve, hardening under the surface, replacing the exhaustion with something colder and more focused. Jinwoo knocked and entered. "I need to show you something." He set a tablet on the table. Naomi looked at it. It was a photograph, a still image pulled from surveillance footage, slightly grainy, time-stamped from 40 minutes ago. It showed a man she didn't recognize, standing outside the building she'd just left. He was on a phone. His face was turned slightly toward the camera. "Yunjai?" she asked. "No." Jinwoo's voice was careful in a way she'd learned to read as preparatory, the way you modulate your voice when you're about to say something that's going to land badly. "This is a man named Seo Byung-chul. He manages external operations for Seong-ho." He paused. "He was also present at your wedding." Naomi looked up. "He attended as a business contact of your father's," Jinwoo said to Tae-seok. "He was on the approved guest list. He would have had access to the venue for 6 hours." The kitchen was very quiet. "He was gathering intelligence," Tae-seok said. "From before you were married," Jinwoo confirmed. Naomi put her coffee cup down very carefully. "Before we were married," she repeated. "Song-ho had someone at our wedding. Before we were married." "Yes." She looked at Tae-seok. He was looking at the tablet. His face had the quality of stone that has been struck, but not yet broken, that moment between impact and fracture, when everything is still structurally intact, but nothing is quite as it was. "He's been watching you for longer than you thought," she said. "Yes." "Which means the vulnerabilities he's found are deeper than we thought." "Yes." And Hyunjae, she stopped, made herself say the next part cleanly. Hyunjae didn't just have access to search parameters. If he's been in the organization for 4 years and was placed deliberately, he has access to things you haven't considered yet. Financial structures, key contacts, maybe fail-safes. Tae-seok looked at Jinwoo. Jinwoo said, "We've been trying to reach Hyunjae for the last 2 hours. He's not at any of his known locations." "He's running," Tae-seok said. "Or he was warned." Jinwoo's voice stayed neutral. "If Seong-ho knows we identified Byung-chul, and if he's still getting information from inside, which we can't rule out." "He's not," Tae-seok said. "How do you know that?" "Because Hyunjae is the only one with the access level that makes the information leak possible. Without him active, the pipeline closes." "Unless it was never just Hyunjae," Naomi said. Both men looked at her. She kept her voice steady. "You said Sung-ho has been planning this for potentially 3 years. You said he's patient. You said he absorbed the Park family by installing his people gradually, over time." She looked at Tae-seok. "What makes you think Hyunjae was the only person he installed?" The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. Tae-seok stood up. He walked to the window, not to look out of it. She understood, but because he needed to move. He stood with his back to the room and his hands at his sides, and she could see the line of his shoulders and what it cost him to stay controlled. Kwon Tae-seok had built his reputation on being 3 steps ahead. The idea that someone had been 3 steps ahead of him for years, possibly for the entire span of their marriage, and before, was not something his architecture had been designed to hold. "If there's a second person," Jinwoo said slowly, "we don't know who it is. We don't know what they have access to, and we don't know whether Seong-ho has already used it." "Has anything moved?" Tae-seok asked, still facing the window. "Anything in the financial structure, the port contracts, the political contacts?" Jinwoo checked his phone. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "The Incheon Port Liaison Director Cha canceled a standing meeting with your representative this morning. No explanation given. That could be coincidence. Director Cha has not missed a standing meeting in 3 years." Tae-seok turned from the window. "Get me a list of every person with access to the port contracts." "Everyone, including people who've been in the organization more than 2 years. That's 40 people. Then we start with 40 people." Jinwoo nodded and stepped out. Naomi was quiet for a moment. Arielle had fallen asleep on the blanket again, one fist near her face, the rhythmic breathing of total trust. Naomi looked at her daughter and thought about the building she'd just left. About 2 months of feeling invisible inside someone else's design. "There's something I need to ask you," she said. Tae-seok turned. "When Song-ho made the original offer of the alliance, she met his eyes. When you refused the first time, you said he threatened to expose weaknesses in your organization. What exactly did he threaten to expose? Something in Tae-seok's expression became very still. What did he know? She pressed. Specifically, what did he say he had? The pause lasted 4 seconds. He had documentation of 3 operations from 2019. Shipping manifests that were falsified. He claimed he had the originals and a clear chain connecting them to my signature. Did he actually have them? I assumed he did, but you never verified it. There wasn't time to Tae-seok. Her voice was quiet and exact. Did you verify that he actually had what he said he had before you signed those divorce papers? The answer was in his face before he said anything. She breathed out slowly, not dramatically, just the quiet exhale of someone absorbing one more thing. So you signed divorce papers and handed him exactly what he needed as leverage, she said, based on a threat you never confirmed was real. The risk of calling his bluff was, I understand risk assessment. I'm asking whether you verified the threat before you. She stopped. Started again more quietly. Before you to sign and leave. He didn't answer, because the answer was no. She picked up her coffee cup and discovered it was empty and set it back down. She was not going to let herself go, where this could take her the full reckoning of that. The particular devastation of learning that her marriage might have ended over a threat that might not have been real. She was going to file that away somewhere she couldn't afford to look at right now, and she was going to stay focused on the immediate problem, because the immediate problem was real and documented, and had people in SUVs parked outside buildings. We need to call him, she said. Tae-seok looked at her sharply. Sung-ho, we need to call him directly. She saw his expression and kept going. Not to negotiate, to make him believe we're negotiating. He's patient, but he's been running this operation for 3 years. And he's close, he can feel it, the way you can feel when something is about to close. That's when patient men get careless. That's when they talk too much. You want to bait him. I want him to believe he's already won. She looked at Tae-seok steadily. You call him? You sound defeated, not completely. Not obviously, but enough. You ask for terms. You let him feel the satisfaction of explaining what he's done. A man who's been operating in secret for 3 years, with no one to tell how he's going to want to talk. Tae-seok was quiet, and while he talks, she said everything he says gets recorded. Documented. Not for the police necessarily, for every corporate partner, every political contact, every financial institution that has a relationship with him. You release it simultaneously, before he can control the story. He'll know it was a setup the moment the files go out. Yes, but by then it won't matter. Tae-seok looked at her across the kitchen table. The afternoon light was coming through the window now, the kind of unremarkable light that made ordinary things look slightly more real than they were. He looked at her the way he used to look at her sometimes, early on, when something, she said, surprised him. Not pleasantly surprised, exactly. More like, I should have known you'd see it. That's not your only problem, Jinwoo said from the doorway. They both turned. Jinwoo was holding his phone against his chest, the screen facing inward, and his expression had crossed from careful to something that Naomi had no word for, yet. What? Tae-seok said, Hyun-jae. Jinwoo came into the kitchen and set his phone on the table face up. On the screen was a message, raw text, no formatting, the kind of thing sent from a temporary number. He reached out. 10 minutes ago. Tae-seok read the message. His face changed. Naomi leaned forward and read it too. I have everything. Original authorization files, signed by Sung-ho. Financial approvals, operational orders, the communication logs from the building Sung-ho put her in. I will give you all of it, but you need to get to me before he does. I have maybe 6 hours, possibly less. The kitchen held a different kind of silence now. It's a trap, Tae-seok said flatly. Maybe, Jinwoo said. But if it's not, we have Seong-ho's direct signature on everything. Not rumors, not financial inference. His name on paper, on the actual operational orders. Tae-seok looked at the message again. Where is Hyun-jae? He sent a location. It's a warehouse space in Bukon. Registered to a logistics company, which is one of ours, which is how he would have known to use it. If Sung-ho knows about the location, Sung-ho knows about every location connected to our logistics division, Naomi said. She said it quietly, and the words landed the way she'd expected them to. Both men looked at her. If Yeonjae has been feeding him information for years, and if there's a second person still active, then Seong-ho's people may already know Yeonjae is reaching out. They may already know the location. Then we don't go, Tae-seok said. Then we lose the evidence, Jin-woo said. And Yeonjae, whatever he's done, he's not going to survive this if Song-ho thinks he's turned. Tae-seok was silent. Naomi looked at Arielle sleeping on the blanket. Then she looked at Tae-seok. If Song-ho gets to Yeonjae first, she said, we lose the documents. We lose the direct evidence. We're left with the recording plan, which works if Seong-ho talks, and he might not, if he knows we're running a play. There's another problem, Jin-woo said. Of course there is, Naomi said. Jin-woo looked at Tae-seok with the expression of a man delivering information he has verified twice, because he didn't believe it the first time. Seong-ho's daughter, Min-seo. She called one of our legitimate business contacts an hour ago. She's asking for a private meeting. With you. Tae-seok stared at him. She didn't say what about, Jin-woo said, but she called from her personal number. Not through her father's office. Not through any of the family's business channels. He paused. And she called the contact she would have known to call if she wanted to reach you without her father knowing. The kitchen was absolutely still. She knows something, Naomi said. Or she's part of it, Tae-seok said. A man who describes his daughter's marriage as a business instrument to a person he's trying to manipulate. Naomi stopped. Reconsidered. Started again quieter. If Min-seo heard what her father said. If she couldn't have. Seong-ho would never. You don't know that, Naomi said. You don't know what she's heard. You don't know how much she knows about what her father is. She looked at him steadily. You assumed I didn't know things. For 3 years. You were wrong about that too. The silence stretched. Tae-seok sat back down. He put both hands on the table. He looked like a man who has been fighting one war and just discovered there are 3 others happening simultaneously. Which was, Naomi thought, probably exactly what it felt like. He looked at her. I can't be in 2 places, he said. No. Yeonjae and Min-seo. Whoever goes to Bukyeon and whoever meets Min-seo, those are 2 different operations happening at the same time. Yes. I need to split, she said. She looked at Jin-woo. Then back at Tae-seok. Jin-woo goes to Bukyeon for Yeonjae. You go to Min-seo. She paused. And I'm not staying here. Naomi, I'm not staying here, she said again. Not because I'm reckless. Because you've been making decisions without me, and look where we are. I am a professional who understands financial crime documentation better than anyone currently in this room. And if Yeonjae's files are what he says they are, someone needs to verify them in the field before they walk out of that warehouse. You have Arielle. Arielle goes with me. She's 4 months old. She goes where I go. The look on his face moved through several things she didn't have time to catalog. I will not, she said quietly, but with absolute precision, be left in a safe house while everything is decided without me. Not again. Never again. Tae-seok looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Jin-woo. She goes with your team, he said. Full coverage. She is the priority. Understood. He looked back at Naomi. Something moved through his expression, not surrender. Not exactly. More like recognition. The slow arrival of understanding something he should have known 3 years ago. If anything goes wrong, he started. I know what to do, she said. Do you trust that? He was quiet for 1 beat. Just 1. Yes. It was the first time she believed him completely. Jin-woo's phone lit up on the table between them. A new message from Yeonjae's number. 4 words. They know where I am. And below it, before any of them could react, a second message arrived on Tae-seok's personal phone, a number he did not recognize. A message he had not been expecting, from a sender whose identity he would not be able to confirm for another 40 minutes, but whose words would alter the architecture of everything. It read, My father didn't offer you an alliance. He offered you a funeral. I have his authorization codes. Meet me alone, or this ends the way he planned it. Tae-seok read it once. Then he turned the phone so Naomi could see it. She read it. Then she looked up at him, And in her eyes was not fear. It was the particular cold clarity of someone who has just realized that the game they thought they were playing is not the game that's actually being played, and that the only move left is the one that changes everything or loses everything, and that there is absolutely no longer any version of this where anyone gets to stay safe. Tae-seok read the message 3 times, not because he didn't understand it the first time, because he was doing what he always did when information arrived that could reshape everything. He was checking his own reaction, holding it at arm's length for 3 seconds, making sure what he felt wasn't distorting what he saw. It was a discipline he'd spent 15 years building. It had kept him alive and solvent and several steps ahead of men who were smarter than him in almost every measurable way. It almost didn't work this time. My father didn't offer you an alliance. He offered you a funeral. I have his authorization codes. Meet me alone or this ends the way he planned it. Min-seo, Jong Song-ho's daughter. 28 years old, European MBA, running 3 legitimate companies, and apparently sitting on her father's most sensitive documentation while reaching out through channels she'd had to find specifically because she didn't want him to know. She's not working with him, Naomi said. You don't know that. She called through a back channel. She said alone. If she were part of the setup, she would have made the meeting easier, not harder. Naomi was looking at the phone, not at him. She's afraid of her father. That's what this reads like. Or that's what it's designed to read like. Tae-seok. She looked up. What does your instinct say? He didn't answer immediately, which was itself an answer. She went around him, he said finally. To reach me. Yes. He stood up and walked to the window again. The light had shifted since the afternoon. It was early evening now. The kind of gray gold that happened in autumn in this part of the country, the sky going soft and unreliable. He stood with his hand flat on the cold glass and thought about Min-seo, whom he'd met twice at formal dinners, and who had sat across the table with the composed, watchful manner of a person who had learned early that watching carefully was safer than speaking. He'd thought she was just quiet, the obedient daughter of a powerful man. He was beginning to think she was something else entirely. Jin-woo goes to Bukyeon, he said. With Naomi? I know what you said. I'm agreeing. He turned from the window. You verify Hunjai's documents. Jin-woo secures him. I meet Min-seo. Alone, Naomi said, like she asked. Alone. Jin-woo's expression made clear his opinion of this, without requiring him to voice it. If it's a setup, I'll deal with it. Tae-seok looked at his lieutenant. Min-seo's message came to my personal phone. Song-ho doesn't know about that phone. The only way she got that number is from a source inside the organization, who was helping her specifically, not him. Yunjai, Naomi said. Possibly. Or someone else who decided, when they saw how this was going to end, that it was time to be on the right side of it. He picked up his jacket from the back of the kitchen chair. How long to Bukyeon? 40 minutes, Jin-woo said. Min-seo's message, she gave a location. Jin-woo checked. She gave it after you responded. A parking structure near the Gangnam Business District. Level 3, 45 minutes from now. That's barely enough time. She said it close deliberately, so you couldn't over-prepare. Naomi said it without judgment. Just observation. She's smart. Tae-seok put his jacket on. He looked at Naomi, across the kitchen, across the table, across the distance that 3 months and a divorce and one sleeping infant had built between them, across everything. She was looking back at him with an expression that wasn't warm and wasn't cold. It was something steadier than both. The expression of a woman who had made a decision about who she was going to be in this moment and was not going to deviate from it. Don't take risks you don't have to take, he said. Same to you. If anything at the warehouse feels wrong, I'll leave. I know how to leave. A beat. I've had practice. He couldn't tell if that was a cut or just a fact. With Naomi lately, the two things overlapped. He looked at Arielle one more time, still on the blanket, still asleep, one fist near her face, the blanket rising and falling with the absolute confidence of someone who has no idea how much is being held in place around her so that she can sleep safely. He looked at his daughter for 3 seconds. Then he walked out. The parking structure was the kind of place that exists everywhere in big cities and belongs to nowhere concrete pillars, the smell of oil and exhaust, strip lighting that turned everything a shade of sick yellow. Level 3 was mostly empty at this hour. Tae-seok arrived 4 minutes early and parked and got out and stood beside his car and waited. He was alone. Genuinely alone. Not the curated version of alone, where your security team is 3 positions away with line of sight. He had told his driver to park on level 1 and stay with the car. He was not armed. He had considered it and decided against it, not because he was feeling noble, but because if this was Min Seo making a genuine approach, showing up armed to a meeting she'd asked for, in fear was the fastest way to destroy the only good thing that was currently in motion. He heard the car before he saw it. A modest sedan, not the kind of vehicle associated with the daughter of a crime patriarch. She parked 3 spaces away and got out. Jang Min Seo was smaller than he remembered. Or maybe the context of formal dinners had given her a different scale. The rooms, the tables, the architecture of those events added size to everyone. Here, in a concrete parking structure, in a plain coat with her hair pulled back and no visible makeup, and the specific hollowness around her eyes of someone who hadn't slept properly in days, she looked exactly like what she was. A young woman who had discovered something about her father that she couldn't put back. She looked at Tae-seok for a moment without speaking. He looked at her. "You came alone," she said. Her Korean was formal, precise, the Korean of someone who'd spent years in international business contexts and had smoothed out the regional textures. "You asked me to. I didn't know if you would. I'm here." She nodded once and reached into the bag over her shoulder and pulled out a flat hard drive. She held it without extending it toward him yet. "This has everything. Authorization files, financial approval chains, operational communication logs. My father signed every document, his codes, his accounts, his instructions." She looked at the drive. He kept copies of everything. He thought it made him safe that if anyone moved against him, the documentation of what he'd ordered would protect him. Because the people who carried out the orders would be implicated too. He used it as mutual assured destruction, Tae-seok said. Yes. She looked up. He didn't account for the possibility that the person who found the files wouldn't care about being implicated. Because the person who found them isn't in the documentation. She paused. "I'm not in any of it. He kept me clean. He was proud of that. He thought it was protecting me. He was using it to keep you usable," Tae-seok said. Not cruelly, just accurately. Min-soo absorbed this. "Yes, I understand that now." She looked at the drive again. "I found the files 6 weeks ago. I've been trying to figure out what to do since then. Whether I was wrong about what I was reading. Whether there was an explanation." She stopped. "There isn't an explanation. What made you move tonight?" Her jaw tightened slightly. "He called me this afternoon. He told me the final phase was starting. He said the pressure on your organization was going to resolve within days." She looked up at Tae-seok with something that was past anger, past grief, somewhere in the territory that has no common name. He said, "Your future is almost arranged. Like I was a package." Like he was proud of the logistics. She extended the drive. "I'm not a package." Tae-seok took the drive. It was lighter than what it contained had any right to be. "There's a recording function built into the drive's software," Min-soo said. "My father had it installed so he could document verbal approvals from partners without their knowledge. It's been running since I activated it 3 days ago." She looked at him steadily. "When you play the files, you'll find 2 conversations. Both are my father speaking. Both are from this week." "What do they say?" "The first one is him explaining the full operation to Byung-chul. The structure, the timeline, the contingencies." She paused. "The second one is from this afternoon, after he called me." Another pause. "He spoke to someone else after he called me. He spoke to the man who's been inside your organization." Tae-seok went still. "It's not Hyunjae," she said. The parking structure was very quiet. Somewhere below them, a car moved, the distant sound of tires on concrete, echoing up through the levels like something trying to reach them. "What do you mean it's not Hyunjae?" Tae-seok's voice was very controlled. "Hyunjae is real. He was passing information. But he wasn't the primary source. Min-seo held his gaze. The person my father spoke to this afternoon, the voice on the second recording. I've heard that voice before. I've heard it at my father's table. I've heard it in conversations he thought I wasn't listening to. She stopped. It's someone you trust more than Hyun Jae. The concrete pillar beside Tae-seok was cold when he put his hand against it. He did it without thinking, just needed something solid. The recording will identify the voice, she said. I can't tell you who it is. I only have a voice. But you'll know. He looked at the drive in his hand. Go, she said. Whatever you're going to do with this, you need to do it before my father realizes I'm not where I'm supposed to be. What happens to you? That's my problem. Min-seo. I have a passport and accounts he doesn't know about, she said with the specific calm of someone who has had weeks to make peace with a decision. I've been preparing for the possibility that I would need to leave. She almost smiled. Not warmly, with a kind of rueful precision. My father taught me to always have an exit. He just didn't think I'd use it against him. Tae-seok looked at her for a moment. The legitimate businesses, the ones you run, I'll restructure them before I go. Independent boards, transparent governance. I'm not leaving those employees with nothing. He nodded. She walked back to her car. He stood in the parking structure with a hard drive in his hand that might contain either a solution or a new catastrophe, and listened to her engine start and her car move away, and thought about the second recording. The voice his father's enemy had been speaking with this afternoon. Someone he trusted more than Hyun Jae. He called Jin-woo. Jin-woo picked up on the first ring. We're at the warehouse. Status? Hyun Jae is here. He's not in good shape, but he's conscious. He has physical documents. Paper copies. We're verifying now. Jin-woo. Tae-seok kept his voice flat. The recording Min-seo gave me. It identifies a second source inside the organization. Someone above Hyun Jae's level. A pause. How confident is she? She heard the voice at her father's table. Another pause. Longer. Tae-seok. Jin-woo's voice had shifted the careful modulation of a man, choosing his next words with absolute precision. Hyun Jae gave us a name 20 minutes ago. He said he didn't know if we'd believe him. I was going to call you after we'd verified. Tell me the name. Silence. Jin-woo. He says it's Park. Dae-won did not move. Park Dae-won, his head of external communications. The man who had been in the organization for 11 years. The man who had attended Tae-seok's wedding. The man who managed the relationships with political contacts and corporate partners, and who had over 11 years made himself so thoroughly indispensable that the idea of operating without him was like the idea of operating without electricity. The man who was at this exact moment, based on Tae-seok's own schedule, which he absolutely would have known, supposed to be managing their primary corporate partner relationship in Seoul. Where is Dae-won right now? Tae-seok said. He heard Jin-woo moving. Heard him speaking quickly to someone off the phone. A pause that lasted 17 seconds, Tae-seok counted them without deciding to. He's not at the partner meeting, Jin-woo said. He called in 40 minutes ago. Said he was running late. No one's seen him since. Tae-seok was already moving toward his car. The recording will confirm it, he said. I'm coming to you. We need to verify the voice before we move on anything. If Dae-won knows we have Hyun Jae, he doesn't know yet. Move Hyun Jae now. Different location. Don't tell anyone in the organization where you're going except me. He got into the car and started the engine. And Jin-woo Naomi. She's here. She's been going through the documents for the last 20 minutes. A beat. She found something. What? Tell her to tell you herself, Jin-woo said. I don't want to describe it wrong. The second location was a restaurant that had been closed for renovations for 2 months. One of the legitimate business holdings, empty and dark, and not connected to anything Dae-won would have known to look at. Jin-woo had moved Hyun Jae in under 15 minutes. Tae-seok arrived to find a man sitting at a restaurant table under a single work light, looking like someone who had made a series of decisions that had arrived, as decisions often do, at a destination he hadn't quite imagined when he started. Hyun Jae was 31. Young enough that Tae-seok still occasionally thought of him as someone who was new, which was its own indictment 4 years, and Tae-seok had never fully updated the file he'd initially built on the man. He was thin in the way that people get thin when they've been scared for a long time, and there was a cut above his left eye that had been cleaned, but not fully closed. "Who did that?" Tae-seok said, looking at the cut. "Byung-chul's people this morning." Hyun-jae's voice was hoarse. "They came to my apartment. I got out the window." "Why didn't you contact us immediately?" "Because I didn't know if Daewon had already told you I was a problem. I didn't know which version of events you had." He looked at Tae-seok with the exhausted, stripped-back honesty of someone who has run out of angles. "I've been passing information. I'm not going to pretend I wasn't. But I want you to know when I understood what Seong-ho was actually planning. What he was going to do to your wife. To the child. I tried to slow it down. I started giving him things that were accurate but delayed. Old information. Things that took him somewhere he'd already been." "When did you start doing that?" "About 6 weeks ago." Tae-seok sat down across from him, the building she was in. "Did you give him that?" Hyun-jae shook his head. "That was day one. I didn't know about the building until day one told me, and by then she'd already been there for weeks. I couldn't tell you without exposing myself." He looked at the table. "I know how that sounds. It sounds like you were protecting yourself." "Yes," no deflection, just the word. "Yes, I was." Naomi came in from the back of the restaurant, where she'd been working through Hyun-jae's document stack. She set a folder on the table between Tae-seok and Hyun-jae, and she did it with a particular precision that he recognized, the kind of precision that meant she'd found something and had organized it exactly so he would understand it as fast as possible. "3 pages," she said. "Look at the dates." He looked. The documents were financial authorization, forms the kind that approved major resource allocations within the organization's legitimate business structure. The dates ran across a period of 14 months. The signatures were Tae-seok's own. He looked at the signatures for a moment. "Those are forgeries," he said. "Yes," Naomi said. "Good ones. But look at the account numbers they authorized transfers to." He looked at the account numbers. They meant nothing to him on first reading. They were long strings of numerals, the anonymous architecture of financial movement. Then Naomi set a second page beside it, a reference document from Hyun-jae's files, and he looked at the 2 pages side by side. The account numbers matched accounts controlled by Seong-ho's corporate network. "Daewon forged your signature on documents authorizing transfers to Seong-ho's accounts," Naomi said. "Over 14 months. The amounts are each under the reporting threshold, small enough individually that they wouldn't flag automatic review. But together it looks like I've been voluntarily funding him," Tae-seok said. "Together it looks like you had a financial relationship with him that you chose to conceal." She looked at him steadily. "If those documents had surfaced without context, without the explanation of what they actually are, it would look like you were already in business with him. Voluntarily. He was building a reason why I couldn't refuse the alliance," Tae-seok said. "Not just leverage. Documentation. Evidence that could be used to claim I was already committed. Retroactive consent," Naomi said. "He was going to make it look like the alliance was your idea." Hyun-jae had been quiet through this. Now he said, "Daewon started the forgeries 11 months ago. I only found out 3 months in. By then he stopped. By then I was already too involved to report it cleanly." Tae-seok looked at the forgeries on the table, looked at his own signature, rendered in someone else's hand, authorizing things he had never authorized. Looked at the careful, patient construction of a trap that had been building for longer than he'd understood, and in more directions than he'd known to look. He thought about the harbor at 2 in the morning. The version of himself that stood there, wondering if power had taken too much. The version that Naomi had seen. The version he'd pushed down repeatedly because he hadn't known what to do with it. He picked up his phone and connected it to a small audio player Jin-woo had set up and played the recording from Min-seo's drive. It ran for 4 minutes and 20 seconds. The first voice was Seong-ho. He was speaking with the controlled satisfaction of a man describing a plan that has come together the way he intended, not gloating. Exactly. More like narrating, the way a craftsman describes finished work. The second voice, when it appeared, said very little. But it said enough. Everyone in the room heard it. Hyun-jae looked at the table. Jin-woo, standing near the door, said nothing. His face said nothing. He was the most controlled person Tae-seok had ever met, and had been for 11 years. And in this moment, even Jin-woo's control had a hairline crack in it, just visible, just enough. Tae-seok stopped the recording. Where is he now? He asked Jin-woo. Jin-woo already had his phone out. He was looking at the screen. His car is moving. He's leaving Seoul, heading south on the expressway. He's running. Yes. Tae-seok stood up. Can we stop him before he reaches Seongho? If we move now, yes. But it has to be now. Naomi was already gathering the documents back into the folder. Tae-seok looked at her. Naomi, I know. I stay here with Hyun-jae and Arielle. She looked up. Go. The documents, I've got them. I know what to do with them. She held his gaze. Go. He went. The drive was 40 minutes of expressway, with Jin-woo on the phone, coordinating 2 cars ahead of them, and the recording playing in his head on a loop, not the whole thing, just the specific 20 seconds where the second voice confirmed the account transfers, confirmed the timeline, confirmed everything with the casual efficiency of a man who had been managing 2 loyalties for 11 years, and had become so practiced at it that he'd stopped being careful. 11 years. Tae-seok had known Park Dae-won for 11 years, had trusted him with political relationships, with corporate access, with the kind of organizational knowledge that took a decade to accumulate. Had thought of him, occasionally, in the unguarded moments that he allowed himself, had thought of him as something approaching a friend, or the version of friendship that existed in a life like his, which was closer to reliable than warm, but was still something. He thought about all the times he'd made decisions based on information that had passed through Dae-won. All the times he'd trusted the picture of the situation because the person painting it had never given him a reason to doubt the brush. He did not think about it for long. There wasn't time. They found Dae-won's car pulled to the shoulder of the expressway, 20 kilometers south of Seoul, hazard lights blinking in the early dark like an apology. The car was empty. Jin-woo's people spread out along the shoulder and the service road and the shallow embankment to the east. Tae-seok walked to the empty car and looked inside. The engine was still running. The door was unlocked. On the passenger seat was a phone, not Dae-won's organizational phone. A second phone with an outgoing call that had lasted 6 minutes and ended 18 minutes ago. He looked at the number the call had gone to. He recognized the last 4 digits. He had called that number himself twice. 3 years ago, from a hotel in Hong Kong, during a negotiation that had run long into the night and required external consultation. It was a number in Songho's network, not Songho directly. Someone the second tier, a coordinator, the kind of position that existed specifically so that the man at the top could claim distance from whatever was being coordinated. Dae-won had called Songho's network 18 minutes ago and spoken for 6 minutes. Tae-seok stood beside the running car in the dark at the edge of a highway, with the hazard lights blinking orange across his face, and understood, with the cold and total clarity that comes when you stop hoping for a different answer, that Dae-won had told Seongho everything. Hyun-jae's location, the documents, Min Si-zo's approach. All of it. His phone rang. Naomi, he picked up. Tell me. 3 cars just pulled up outside. Her voice was precise. Controlled. The voice of a woman running the same calculation he was. They're not Jin-woo's people. We're in the back. Service entrance. I already moved, Arielle. A pause, not hesitation. Just movement. The sound of someone doing several things simultaneously. Hyun-jae is with us. The documents are with us. Another pause. There's a way out through the kitchen. I'm looking at it right now. Take it. I'm going to need you to tell me where to go when I'm out. Jin-woo is with you. Tell me where to go. He was already moving back to his car, east 2 blocks from the restaurant. There's a parking structure levels. B2 and B3 connect to the building across the street through a maintenance tunnel. Go through the tunnel, come up on the far side, there's a taxi rank at the corner. And then, call me from a cab. I'll have someone meet you. A sound from her end movement, a door, the specific acoustics of a commercial kitchen. He heard Arielle make a sound, not a cry, just a sound. the kind that meant she was awake and aware and being held tightly. Naomi, he said it quickly, because there wasn't time, and because he needed to say it before the line potentially dropped. You can do this. I know I can, she said. Matter of fact. No performance. Just someone who knew what she was capable of and was about to go do it. The line stayed open. He could hear her moving. He got into the car. Jinwoo was already on another call, reorganizing the perimeter, redirecting people toward the restaurant. Tae-seok drove. In his ear through the open line, he heard a door open. He heard Naomi's footsteps change against a different surface. He heard the night come in around her traffic, wind the city, doing what cities do, indifferent to whatever was happening inside any individual life. He heard her say very quietly something that wasn't directed at him. He heard her say in the low, certain voice that he'd heard her use before, only when she was talking to Arielle, "I've got you. Keep holding on." He pressed harder on the accelerator. Somewhere in Seoul, on a highway shoulder, Park Dae-won was gone on foot or in another vehicle or already across a boundary. Tae-seok hadn't closed fast enough. Somewhere in Bukhan, Song-ho's people were converging on a restaurant that was now empty. Somewhere in the city, Naomi was moving through a maintenance tunnel in the dark with their daughter against her chest, and a folder of forged documents, and the specific, unbreakable competence of a woman who had been underestimated at every turn. And Tae-seok was driving toward all of it, toward the place where everything converged. With Min Seo's hard drive in his jacket pocket and Hyunjae's documents in Naomi's hands, and the full weight of 11 years of misplaced trust pressing down on his chest like a physical thing. He had one move left. One move that had to work on the first attempt, because there was no second attempt available. Because Song-ho now knew that Tae-seok knew, and a man who has operated in secret for 3 years and suddenly finds his cover gone does not slow down. He speeds up. Tae-seok's phone lit up with a new message. Unknown number, but he recognized the pattern, the same format Min Seo had used before she identified herself. This message was not from Min Seo. It was from Song-ho. 4 sentences, the precise, unhurried prose of a man who believes he still holds the highest card. You have the documents. You have the recordings. You have your wife. You still don't have the one thing that makes all of it matter, and by morning, neither will anyone else. Tae-seok read it once. He knew exactly what it meant. Sung-ho wasn't running. He was moving to the final piece, the one Tae-seok hadn't accounted for. The piece that would make every document and every recording and every carefully gathered piece of evidence irrelevant. Because the audience for that evidence was about to be systematically removed from the equation. He called Jinwoo. "I need every contact we have," he said. "Corporate, political, financial. Everyone Song-ho has a relationship with. I need them contacted tonight, not tomorrow, not in the morning. In the next 2 hours. That's 40 people minimum. Then we start now. With what? We have the documents, but they need to be verified, formatted. The recordings need to be authenticated." Naomi, Tae-seok said. Jinwoo was quiet for a beat. "Naomi can do it," Tae-seok said. "She knows financial documentation. She knows compliance structures. She knows exactly how to present this so it lands cleanly on first read." He paused. "Get her to safety, get her a laptop and a secure line, and get out of her way." Another beat. Then Jinwoo said, "And you?" Tae-seok thought about Song-ho's message. About the 4 sentences, and what they meant, and the specific shape of the move being described, the last-minute destruction of an audience, the severing of relationships before information could reach them. He thought about the harbor at 2 in the morning. He thought about a pink plastic bracelet. He thought about Naomi in a second-hand doll rocking chair in a small apartment, telling an unborn child that she had her, that they were going to figure it out. "I'm going to call Seong-ho," he said. Jinwoo said nothing. Directly, Tae-seok said, "I'm going to call him, and I'm going to give him exactly what he's been waiting 3 years to hear." And while he's listening, Tae-seok said, "Naomi releases everything." Jinwoo was quiet for exactly 2 seconds, then understood. The line closed. Tae-seok drove through the dark, with both hands on the wheel, and the city moving past him in streaks of light, and he thought about what he was about to do. Not the mechanics of it. The mechanics were simple enough. Call Seong-ho. Sound defeated. Let the man talk. He'd done harder things with less preparation. He knew how to perform surrender. He'd watched enough men do it to know exactly where the seams were, the slight over-eagerness. The way relief makes people say more than they intended to. The specific loosening that happens when someone who has been carrying a secret for years finally gets to put it down in front of another person. What he was thinking about was the cost, not to himself. He'd made his peace with his own costs years ago. He was thinking about Naomi in a kitchen somewhere, working through documents in the specific focused way. She had not frantic, not rushed, just completely present and precise, the way she'd always been when something mattered. He was thinking about what it cost a person to be that calm when the walls were that close. He was thinking about the fact that he had asked her to do this, had asked her, after everything, to trust him enough to work alongside him. Had asked her and she had said yes, not because she forgave him, not because she'd decided this past didn't matter, but because she was the kind of person who looked at what needed doing and did it, and the kind of person who understood that some things were bigger than the damage between two people. He pulled to the side of the road. He sat in the parked car in the dark for 30 seconds. Just 30. Then he found Seong-ho's number, the direct line, the one that had been exchanged at the very beginning of the alliance conversation, weeks before the divorce papers, when Tae-seok had still believed he was navigating a straightforward negotiation with a straightforward man. He called. It rang twice. Tae-seok. Song-ho's voice was warm, expansive. The voice of a man who has been expecting a call and has had time to settle into the pleasure of it. I thought it might be tonight. You left me very few options, Tae-seok said. I left you exactly the options I intended. That's different. A pause. You have the documents. You have Minseo's drive. You have the man who's been leaking from inside your own house. Another pause, and in it was something that functioned like sympathy, the performed sympathy of a man who knows he's won and can afford generosity now. I'm sorry about day one. That one must have been particularly difficult. Tae-seok said nothing. He let the silence work. Let it read as the silence of a man absorbing a wound. Song-ho filled it. They always filled it. 11 years, the old man said. He came to me before he came to you, actually. Did you know that? He was referred when he was 26. Before he was placed with your organization. It wasn't even difficult. You wanted someone with his particular skill set, and I happened to know someone available. A soft sound that might have been a laugh. The most important moves don't feel like moves when you make them. They feel like convenience. What do you want? Tae-seok said. Flat. Tired. 2 notes below what he actually felt, which put him exactly at the register of genuine defeat. What I've always wanted, Seong-ho said, the ports. The logistics contracts. The political relationships your organization has built on the Busan side that I can't acquire any other way. A pause. And I want this done cleanly. No prolonged negotiation. No theater. I'm old enough to be tired of theater. And my wife. A pause. The careful pause of a man deciding how honest to be. Your wife is a variable that resolves itself if the primary agreement is reached. She goes home. The child grows up with a father who is alive and functional. Everyone moves forward. Another pause. I have no interest in hurting anyone who doesn't require hurting. I want you to know that I believe you, Tae-seok said. He believed no such thing. But the point was not belief. The point was that Seong-ho could hear in his voice something that sounded like belief, and that sound was the thing that would keep him talking. The alliance terms, Tae-seok said. Walk me through them. The actual structure. I want to understand what I'm agreeing to before I... He stopped. Let the stop hang. Let it sound like a man finding it hard to finish the sentence. Of course, Seong-ho said, and he began to explain. He explained with the fluency of a man who had been building the architecture for years and knew every room. The port access, which terminals, which documentation flows, how the oversight would be restructured. The logistics companies which contracts would be transferred, how the transition would be staged to avoid regulatory attention. The political relationships which individuals, what the value exchange had been, how those relationships would be absorbed into a unified management structure. He explained the surveillance network he'd built around Naomi, how the building had been acquired 18 months before she arrived, how Day One had guided the search parameters so that her own attempts to disappear led her toward the trap rather than away from it, how Byung-chul had managed the ground operation with a precision that Seong-ho described with audible pride. He explained what he had on the Park family in Daegu, how the absorption there had worked, step by step, over 37 months. He explained what he had on Tae-seok, the forged documents, the financial transfer records, the network of corroborating details that Day One had spent 11 months constructing. He explained all of it. He explained it for 9 minutes and 40 seconds. Tae-seok held the phone and listened, and said almost nothing, just enough at precise intervals to give the impression of a man trying to understand the full shape of a situation that had outmaneuvered him. A soft sound here, a word there, never interrupting, never accelerating, just the attentive silence of someone receiving information they needed. At 9 minutes and 40 seconds, Song-ho paused and said, "Do you understand the full scope now?" "Yes," Tae-seok said. His voice had changed, not dramatically, not in a way that an unfamiliar person would catch. But Sanch had been studying Tae-tis for 3 years, and the change was there, the loss of the two-note deficit, the return of something leveled and clear. A pause on the other end. "Thank you," Tae-seok said. "That was exactly what I needed. Silence. Not a comfortable silence. The silence of a man whose internal architecture has just undergone a rapid and unwelcome reassessment. The call has been recorded," Tae-seok said. "Clean audio. Your voice is identifiable. The content is specific enough that no competent legal analyst will have difficulty parsing intent." He kept his voice even. Not triumphant, just accurate. In approximately the next 90 minutes, every corporate partner, every financial institution, every political contact with a relationship to your name is going to receive a package. It will contain the forged documents with identification of the forgery, Hyunjai's physical records, Minseo's drive, and this recording. A pause. The package is being assembled right now by someone who understands financial crime documentation better than anyone you've planned around. Another silence. "Longer, my wife," Tae-seok said. "The variable that resolves itself." He ended the call. He sat in the parked car for a moment with the phone in his hand, and the dark outside, and the city doing what it always did, moving, indifferent, continuous. He breathed out slowly. His hands were steady. He was slightly surprised by that, and then he wasn't, because he understood that the steadiness wasn't calm. It was the specific quality of a man who has just committed everything to a single move and is past the point where trembling would help. He called Naomi. She picked up on the second ring. Background sounds: a keyboard, a lamp hum, the particular acoustic of a small enclosed space. "It's done?" she asked. "My end is done. How much time do you need?" 40 minutes. Maybe 35. Her voice was the voice he remembered from the compliance work she used to describe to him early in their marriage, not excited, just in it, just completely inside the task. The recording is the piece that changes everything. The documents are corroborating detail. I'm packaging them so the recording comes first 30 seconds in. Any recipient is going to understand exactly what they're hearing before they can decide not to. Smart, I know. A pause. A keystroke. The political contacts, I've framed their packages differently from the corporate ones. Political people respond to exposure. Corporate people respond to liability. Each package is written for the person receiving it. He was quiet for a moment. "You've been thinking about this for a while," he said. "I've had time to think," she said. "Matter of fact, safe houses aren't very stimulating." "Naomi, 35 minutes, she said. "Let me work." The line closed. He started the car. The private terminal was 40 minutes south of the city, the kind of facility that existed to accommodate people who had reasons not to use commercial airports. Tae-seok had been here twice before. The access road was straight and poorly lit, and the kind of road that made you aware of exactly how alone you were on it. He'd been told Seong-ho was here, not by Jin-woo, by Min-seo, who had sent a final message 40 minutes after their meeting in the parking structure, a single line, a location, nothing more. He didn't know how she knew, and he hadn't asked. She was gone by now, passport in hand, accounts activated, legitimate businesses restructured as promised. He hoped she made it to wherever she was going. He thought she probably would. She had, it turned out, been preparing for a long time. He came through the terminal gate alone. No convoy. No visible security. One car, no escort. Seong-ho was standing beside a private jet on the tarmac. The jet's engines were running not at full power, but running, the specific idling sound of something prepared to move at short notice. There were 2 other men nearby, but they weren't approaching. They were positioned the way security positions itself when it's uncertain of the situation and waiting for direction. Tae-seok got out of his car. He walked across the tarmac toward the old man, and the wind off the field pushed at his jacket, and the jet engines made a constant prayer against the air, and he thought, with a kind of distant clarity, that this was the most exposed he had been in 15 years. No armor, no preparation, no 3 steps ahead. Just himself and what he'd built and what he'd broken and what he was trying to salvage. Song-ho watched him approach without moving. The old patriarch was in his early 70s, compact and gray-haired, and dressed with the kind of careful formality that powerful men develop over decades, not fashion, just a statement that they still intend to be taken seriously. His face was unreadable in the way that faces become after a lifetime of practice. Tae-seok stopped 6 feet away. Neither man spoke for a moment. Wind, engine sound, the distant lights of the city smearing the low clouds with a brownish orange. "You came alone," Song-ho said. "Yes." Why? Tae-seok looked at the old man. "Because what I have to say doesn't require an audience. And because I want you to understand that I'm not afraid of you. I'm not afraid of what you have on me or what you think you still have to threaten me with." He paused. "I wanted you to hear that from my face." Song-ho was quiet. "You built something extraordinary," Tae-seok said, and he meant it not as flattery, not as a move, as an observation. 3 years, multiple layers. People placed years in advance. You studied me carefully enough to identify the one thing I protected without ever admitting I was protecting it. He paused. "You were right about what it was. You were wrong about what that meant. She was your weakness," Song-ho said. "She was the reason I finally understood what weakness actually was." Tae-seok kept his voice level. "Not her. Not Arielle. Me. My refusal to trust anyone outside the operational structure I'd built. My belief that control and protection were the same thing." He looked at the old man steadily. "You used that against me. But in trying to use it, you gave me the thing I'd been refusing to build for 10 years. Song-ho said nothing. "The files are going out," Tae-seok said. "Right now. Tonight. Not tomorrow, not in the morning. Every contact in your network is receiving the same package at the same time, so no one can call ahead to warn anyone else." He paused. "Your banks are going to start making calls in the morning. Your political contacts are going to spend the next 48 hours deciding how far ahead of this story they need to get. Your corporate partners are going to begin the process of calculating how much of your liability they can afford to absorb." He paused again. "And Minseo heard everything on that drive. She heard you describe her marriage as an instrument. She heard you describe a 4-month-old child as leverage." Something moved in Seong-ho's face. It was not guilt. It was something more complicated than guilt, the expression of a man who has compartmentalized something so successfully that hearing it described plainly is the first time it arrives with its full weight. "She's gone," Tae-seok said. "She restructured the legitimate businesses before she left. Whatever happens to you, those employees have clean governance." He looked at the old man. "She's a better person than you made space for." Song-ho looked at the jet. "You can board," Tae-seok said. "You can fly somewhere and spend however long you have left running. The recording alone will follow you. It'll reach every jurisdiction where you have assets within 72 hours. But you can run if that's your preference." He paused. "Or you can give me the phone." Song-ho looked at him. "The encrypted phone," Tae-seok said. "The authorization files you carry personally. The ones Minseo didn't have access to, the original operational orders in your handwriting that predate the digital documentation. I know you have them. A man who keeps copies of everything, keeps the originals closest. Sung-ho looked at him for a long time. The jet engines continued their patient idling. The wind pushed steadily off the field. You built an empire, Sung-ho said finally. And you let one woman and one child become the axis it rotates around. Yes, Tae-seok said simply. I did. That's its strength. I know. He held the old man's gaze. But it's the only thing I built that I don't regret. Song-so looked at him for another long moment. Then he looked at the jet. Then, slowly, with the deliberateness of a man who has made many decisions in his life and understands that this one is different in kind from all the others, he reached into his travel bag. He removed an encrypted phone. He held it for a moment. Then he placed it on the wing stairs railing between them. Then he reached back into the bag and removed a slim folder paper, handwritten, the kind of document that predated his digital operation by years. He placed that beside the phone. Then he sat down on the stairs. He didn't board the jet. He didn't make a call. He simply sat down, with the weight of a man who has been carrying something for too long and has finally set it down, and he looked at the tarmac between his feet, and he said nothing more. Tae-seok picked up the phone and the folder. He looked at the old man for a moment, not with contempt, not with satisfaction, with something quieter than either, the complicated, unglamorous feeling of a thing being finished. He walked back to his car. His phone showed 3 messages from Jin-woo. He read them as he walked. The first said the packages had gone out, all 41 contacts, simultaneous distribution, delivery confirmed. The second said Director Cha had already called asking for an urgent meeting. The third said Daewon had been located at a bus terminal in Suwon, attempting to purchase a ticket under a false name, and was currently being held by Jinwoo's people, pending whatever decision Tae-seok wanted to make about next steps. He stood beside his car and looked back at the tarmac. Song-ho was still sitting on the jet stairs. He hadn't moved. His 2 security men were standing at a distance, uncertain, the posture of people waiting for an instruction that wasn't coming. Tae-seok got in the car. He sat in the driver's seat and did not start the engine for 2 minutes. He thought about Park Daewon. 11 years. The man had sat across from him at tables, had traveled with him, had managed relationships that required real trust, had known for 11 years exactly what he was doing, and had done it anyway, not from necessity, apparently, not from fear, but from a calculation made at 26 that had become the foundation of an entire life. He thought about what you did with that, how you processed 11 years of misdirection built into the scaffolding of your own organization. Whether there was a clean way through that didn't require you to tear the scaffolding down. He started the car. He drove back toward the city. The apartment Naomi was using belonged to one of Jinwoo's contacts, clean, unconnected, 3 floors up in a building, with 2 exit routes and a parking level that connected to the adjacent street. Tae-seok had the address. He drove there directly. Jinwoo let him in. The main room had been converted into a temporary workspace, a laptop, printed pages organized in precise stacks, 2 phones and a recording device connected by a small hub. Naomi was standing at the counter with a cup of something, looking at the organized stacks with the expression of someone who has just finished a large task and is running an inventory of what's been accomplished. Arielle was asleep in the carrier, which Naomi was still wearing, because Naomi had apparently sent out 41 simultaneous document packages while wearing an infant, which struck Tae-seok, standing in the doorway, as the most Naomi thing he had ever witnessed. She'd looked up when he came in. He looked back at her. "It's done?" she asked. He didn't board the plane. She absorbed this. The authorization files? He held up the folder. She crossed the room and took it, opened it, scanned the first 2 pages with the focused speed of someone who knew exactly what they were looking at. She nodded once. "This fills the gap. The digital records document what was ordered. These show when the decision was made before you refused the alliance, before any of the leverage moves. This establishes premeditation." She looked up. "This is the piece that makes it complete." "I know." She looked at him for a moment. "You went alone." "He asked me to." "Min-seo, you went alone to face a man who had been trying to destroy your family for 3 years." "Yes." She looked at him with an expression he couldn't fully read. Not warm, not cold. Something in the register of people who have been through something together that changed them both and are only beginning to understand the shape of the change. Sit down, she said. You look like you've been running on nothing for 18 hours. Probably longer. Sit down anyway. He sat at the kitchen table. She set the folder down and turned back to the counter and poured a second cup of whatever she had and set it in front of him without asking if he wanted it. Tea, he discovered. Plain slightly too hot. He drank it anyway. Arielle made a small sound in the carrier. Not a cry. Just the sound of a sleeping baby reasserting her presence. Naomi adjusted the carrier slightly without breaking her train of thought. Day one, she said. Jinwoo has him. What are you going to do? He looked at the cup. I haven't decided. What are your options? He looked at her. Do you want to weigh in? She looked back at him with an expression that said this was not a question she'd expected from him, which told him something about how far they still had to go. Yes, she said, I want to weigh in. So he told her the options. Not the version he'd have told Jin Woo, the operational calculus, the organizational consequences, the risk assessment. The full version. What Day One had done and when and what it had cost. What the consequences of different responses would be within the organization for morale, for the remaining people who hadn't known and would now have to process working in a structure where this had happened. What Tae-seok's instincts said and what the rational argument said and where those two things diverged. She listened. All of it. She didn't interrupt. She drank her tea and listened, and when he finished, she was quiet for a moment. And then she said, the people in the organization who didn't know they're going to need to see a response that makes the structure didn't contain this because it was complicit. It contained it because it was infiltrated. Those are different things. She looked at him. The response has to reflect that difference. Yes. Day One cooperating fully with investigators protects that distinction better than any other outcome. It makes his crime legible as an external intrusion rather than an internal failure of values. He'd have to agree to cooperate. You're about to have a significant amount of leverage over a man sitting in a room with Jin Woo. She looked at him steadily. I imagine he'll agree, Tae-seok almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. Arielle woke up. This time actually woke up eyes open, the immediate full presence return that babies had. She turned her head within the carrier and found her mother's face, and then, over her mother's shoulder, found Tae-seok sitting at the table. She looked at him, he looked at her. She had grown since the last time he'd been close enough to look at her properly, which had only been hours ago, but which felt in some ways like a different era. She was studying him with the same calm, unhurried attention she'd given him before the unmediated assessment, of someone who didn't yet know how to pretend. She made a sound. He made one back, the same involuntary reflex as before. Naomi watched this happen. She watched her daughter and the man who was her daughter's father conduct their second conversation in a language that predated language, and she felt the specific, complicated ache of something that couldn't be resolved quickly or cleanly, the ache of a thing being slowly, imperfectly rebuilt. She's going to need to know you, Naomi said. He looked up. I know. Not the version of you that makes decisions without consulting people. The actual version. She looked at him directly. She's going to need the man who sat on the floor of my apartment and made these sounds at a baby because he couldn't help himself. He was quiet. That man is more trustworthy than the other one, she said. Not unkindly. I know that too. Do you? He thought about the harbor at 2 a.m. About what he'd been asking himself on those mornings and never answering. About whether power had taken too much. About whether the calculation always favored the empire over the person. I'm beginning to, he said. Naomi looked at him for a long moment. Then she unclipped the carrier and lifted Arielle out of it and walked around the table and set the baby in Tae-seok's arms. He stiffened slightly, not from reluctance, from the sheer unfamiliarity of it, the specific terror of holding something this small and this irreplaceable. Arielle settled against his chest with the ease of someone accepting a fact. She put one hand against his jacket and turned her head and looked at the window. Tae-seok held his daughter. He held her carefully, both arms, with the focus of a man holding something fragile, and then, as she settled further into him, with something less rigid, with the beginning of something that wasn't grip but wasn't quite ease either. Something in between, something new, the way all important things start. Naomi sat down across from him. She didn't say anything. Outside, Busan's lights were doing what they always did, filling the dark with their indifferent brightness. The harbor, visible in the distance if you knew where to look. "I'm not ready to come back," Naomi said. "I know. To what we were. I'm not—" She stopped, started again. "There are things that happened that I'm still—" She looked at the table. "It's going to take time. More time than either of us probably wants it to take. I know. And I'm going to need you to keep doing what you did tonight. Tell me things. Actually tell me. Not when you've already decided. Not when you need me to ratify a conclusion you've already reached. Before, yes. That's not a skill you have yet." "No," he agreed. "It isn't. You'll have to learn it." He looked at Arielle, who had fallen back asleep against his chest, with her hand still pressed against his jacket. "I'm learning other things I didn't know how," he said. "I think I can manage." Naomi looked at her daughter's face against her father's jacket. She looked for a while, without speaking. Then she said, "She has your eyes." He looked up. "I've been refusing to say it," Naomi said, "since she was born. But she does." She looked at Arielle with the expression that came over her sometimes, the one that had no name, not soft, not hard, just entirely present. Something around the eyes. He looked down at his daughter. He looked at her for a long time. "Thank you," he said, "for not telling me, for making that choice." She looked at him. "I understand why you did it," he said. "I understand it was the right thing. I understand that if you had told me, I would have..." He stopped. "I would have made it about management. I would have built a plan around it and called that love." He paused. "Leaving was the right thing. It was the thing I had to do," she said. "I'm not sure right is the word. It was brave." She looked at him with something between surprise and resistance, the expression of a woman who is not comfortable accepting acknowledgement from the person who made the bravery necessary. Then she looked away. "It was survival," she said. "For both of us, yes." The apartment was quiet. Jin Woo was in another room, managing the aftermath that would unfold over the next 72 hours: calls, meetings, the careful unwinding of everything Song-ho had built and everything Daewon had enabled. It would take months. Some of it would take years. Organizations didn't recover from deep infiltration quickly, and the relationships that had been leveraged and the trust that had been spent were not going to return simply because the immediate threat was gone. Tae-seok knew this. He had built enough to know how long the rebuilding took. He also knew, sitting in that kitchen with his daughter asleep on his chest and his wife, his ex-wife, sitting across from him in the particular quality of silence that only exists between people who have been through something together that cost both of them, that the organization was not the thing he most urgently needed to rebuild. "I'm not going to rush this," he said. She looked at him. "Whatever this is," he said, "whatever we're doing. I'm not going to make it into a plan or a timeline or an optimization problem." He looked at Arielle. "I'm just going to show up. For her. For you, if you'll let me. And I'm going to keep showing up until whatever happens next happens." Naomi was quiet for a moment. "That's the most non-Tae-seok thing you've ever said," she said. "I know. You mean it?" "Yes." She looked at him the way she'd looked at him when they first met, not the later version, not the version overlaid with everything that had accumulated. The first version, the look she'd had across a conference table in Seoul when she'd been there for work, and he'd been there for the same meeting for entirely different reasons. When she'd looked at him with the direct, slightly impatient attention of someone who was assessing whether a person was what they appeared to be. She looked at him like that now. "Okay," she said. "Just that. Not forgiveness, not yet. Maybe not for a long time. Not the restoration of what had been, because she'd been clear about that, and she'd meant it. Just okay. Just the door opening 1 inch instead of being closed. 1 inch was enough. Outside, the harbor sat beneath the sky doing what harbors do, holding the weight of all the things that moved across it, all the commerce and the secrecy, and the ordinary human business of getting from one place to another. Tae-seok had looked at that harbor from his window, At 2 in the morning, more times than he could count, wondering what he'd spent himself on and whether it had been worth it. He wasn't going to answer that question tonight. He was going to sit in this kitchen and hold his daughter and let his wife sit across from him in whatever quiet she needed, and he was going to let that be enough. Arielle shifted against his chest. Her hand opened and closed against his jacket, that grip, that fierce instinctive claim. He adjusted his hold slightly, and she settled, and the room settled with her, and outside the city kept moving through the dark, toward morning, the way it always did. Tae-seok did not think about the harbor. He thought about this kitchen. He thought about the fact that he was in it. He thought about the fact that, for the first time in longer than he could clear remember, he did not want to be anywhere else. Months later, the kind of months that have weather in them, a winter that came early and a spring that was slow to arrive in afternoon, found its way through the windows of an apartment that was Naomi's, and that had gradually, quietly, without announcement, begun to also contain signs of Tae-seok. A jacket on the hook by the door, a coffee cup in the cabinet that was his specific kind because Naomi had bought it without telling him she'd noticed what kind he used. A small photograph on the windowsill that Naomi had taken herself, not a professional portrait, just a phone photograph, slightly overexposed, of Arielle and Tae-seok on the floor, Arielle holding both feet in the air with triumphant concentration, while Tae-seok sat nearby, looking at her with an expression that no camera should probably have caught, but had. That photograph stayed on the windowsill. Naomi had put it there herself. On the afternoon in question, Tae-seok was on the floor. Not because he'd been asked to be, not because it was the appropriate posture for the situation, but because Arielle was on the floor, and Arielle was the axis things rotated around now, in the way that children become the axis when you stop fighting the gravity of it. She was 8 months old. She had opinions about things. She communicated these opinions primarily through a combination of sounds and expressions of profound displeasure and occasional moments of entirely disproportionate delight, usually provoked by small things, the way light moved across the wall, the specific sound of a plastic elephant when squeezed, the appearance of Tae-seok's face around a corner, which consistently produced a reaction that he still could not entirely process without something in his chest, doing something structurally significant. She was working on sitting up unassisted, had been working on it for 2 weeks. She could get there, and she could hold it for increasingly long stretches. And then she would wobble and decide whole enterprise was beneath her and roll sideways onto the mat with a sound that had taken Tae-seok 3 full experiences to identify as satisfaction rather than distress. He sat 2 feet away and watched her attempt it again. She got there, held it, looked at him with the expression of someone expecting acknowledgement. He said, "That's it. You've got it." She lost it and went sideways. He did not say anything further, because he had learned that Arielle did not require commentary on her failures, only on her successes, and that the best response to a sideways roll was simply waiting for her to reorient and try again. Naomi came in from the kitchen and sat on the couch and watched this interaction without announcing herself. She had a cup of coffee and a book she wasn't reading, her legs tucked under her in the specific comfortable shape of a person who was at home in their space. Arielle saw her mother and made a sound of complex communication. "I know," Naomi said. "Tell him, not me." Arielle turned back to Tae-seok and repeated the sound. "I agree," he said gravely. Naomi made a sound that was not quite a laugh, and returned to not reading her book. Tae-seok looked at Arielle, who's already setting up for another attempt at sitting, already committed to the project with the total investment that only babies and people who have forgotten to be afraid bring to difficult things. He thought about Seong-ho's trial, which had concluded 6 weeks ago. 14 months of proceedings, during which Seong-ho had said very little publicly and cooperated slightly with investigators, and maintained, throughout, the specific dignity of a man who understood that the performance of dignity was the last form of control available to him. The conviction had covered 9 counts. The sentencing had been reported in 3 newspapers and then largely forgotten because the public had moved on to other things, the way the public always did. He thought about Daewon, who had cooperated fully as predicted and whose testimony had been central to 3 of the 9 counts, who was facing a separate proceeding, who Tae-seok had not spoken to since the night at the bus terminal and did not expect to speak to again. He thought about Min-seo, from whom he'd received one message 4 months after the conviction. A single line from a foreign number, no location, no explanation. The businesses are profitable under independent governance. The employees are well. I hope your daughter has your stubbornness. He had read it twice and found in it the specific humor of a woman who had made herself disappear on her own terms and was doing fine. He thought about Jin Woo, who had stayed, who had helped rebuild, slowly, carefully, the organizational structure with new transparency protocols, with oversight that Tae-seok had not resisted implementing, with the kind of changes that were hard and embarrassing to make and necessary to make, and that Jin Woo had navigated with the quiet, precise professionalism that had been his consistent characteristic for 15 years. He thought about the harbor at 2 in the morning. The last time he'd been there not sleepless, not alone. Naomi had been there, standing beside him, Arielle, in the carrier against her chest, both of them looking out at the water for no particular reason except that it was a nice night and they'd been walking and ended up there. She'd asked him what he used to think about when he stood there. He'd told her. She'd listened, which was what she did actually listened, the way some people never learn to, and then she'd said, "You were asking the wrong question." He'd asked her what the right question was. She'd said, "Not whether it's taken too much, whether it gets to keep taking." He looked at Arielle, who had achieved the sitting position again and was holding it, her whole small body committed to the balance, her expression one of fierce determination. She held it, and looked at her father with the expectation of someone who knows, with complete certainty, that she will be seen. He looked back at her. "You've got it," he said. "You've absolutely got it." She beamed. Then she went sideways, caught herself on one hand, with more grace than she'd managed before, and looked up at him with an expression that said, very clearly, that she was not finished. He was already smiling before he knew he was doing it. On the couch, Naomi watched her daughter and her daughter's father on the floor of her apartment, and she didn't say anything, and she didn't try to define what this was yet, and she didn't ask where it was going. She reached over and picked up her book. And outside through the window, Busan Harbor caught the afternoon light and held it, the way the sea holds everything, without deciding to, without effort, simply because that is what it does, and because some things, once they come to rest in the right place, do not leave.